Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 28, season 2. I am so excited to put this episode up because I know a lot of you are eyeing summer greens production right now and thinking about it at least. And Ray Tyler and I really get in some interesting technical detail here with some of his easy leaf trials, how he currently feels about Salanova, about direct seeding lettuce in summer, and just a whole lot else. Also, Ray has been moving more towards a sort of no-till system over the years, and we talk about what that looks like. I am a really big fan of Ray's, and we get super nerdy and technical in this conversation. However, if you're not familiar with Ray's farm and story, I recommend listening to his episode of Farmer to Farmer with the late, great Chris Blanchard, or the episode he more recently did with Michael Kilpatrick for the Thriving Farmer podcast to kind of get caught up. I'm going to warn you, it tugs on the heartstrings, but it's an amazing story, and I just really am fond of Ray and his wife Ashley. I think they are doing such great work. Anyway, great conversation, so I hope you love it. And of course, I could not bring it to you without the help of our show sponsors like BCS America.
You already know about the legendary versatility of BCS two-wheel tractors on the small farm. You know it's the most economical and time-saving choice for market farmers, building beds with the rotary plow, mixing amendments with the power harrow, and mowing cover crops with the flail mower. But a BCS two-wheel tractor can do much more beyond the small farm. BCS powers more than 40 high-quality PTO-driven attachments, each with the power and performance of an all-gear drive transmission. Blow snow with BCS's snow thrower, also known as the snow cannon. Chip and shred debris with the chipper shredder. Clean your property with the pressure washer. Irrigate your lawn or garden with the high-pressure irrigation pump. Haul over 800 pounds, including yourself, with a rideable utility trailer. And now, spread compost evenly over 30-inch beds with the all-new spreader attachment. Yep, BCS is pretty much the Swiss Army knife of power equipment. Check out bcsamerica.com for the latest attachments, videos, promotions, and more. That's bcsamerica.com.
Also sponsoring the show today, Growing for Market Magazine.
Hi, I'm Andrew Mefford, editor of Growing for Market Magazine. We're excited to be back sponsoring the No-Till Market Garden podcast, so we made a code for listeners to get 25% off any subscription. Head on over to growingformarket.com and enter the code WORM, that's WORM, for the discount. We're still on the same mission as when the Flower Farmer author Lynn Basinski founded the magazine 29 years ago, to be a resource written by farmers for farmers with practical ideas and information to help local farms succeed. There are a decade of back issues and articles available online, plus subscribers automatically get 20% off any of the books we sell, including the No-Till book bundle of 3 no-till books listed together at 10% off the cover price, so you can add your subscriber discount and get a total of 30% off the price of all 3. If you do farmers markets, farm stands, CSA, local wholesaling, dream of starting a no-till farm, or a little of everything, if you like what you're hearing on the podcast, go to Growing for Market and use the code WORM for 25% off any subscription.
Big thank you to our show supporters, and enough from me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Ray Tyler of Rose Creek Farms. Ray Tyler, welcome to the podcast.
Jesse, it is great to be here.
And it is so great to have you on, Ray. I always enjoy our conversations. And I figured let's just start where we always do. Give us a brief rundown of Rose Creek, where you're located, what size acreage you're actually working on with right now, and those sorts of things.
Yep. So we are in a small town called Selmer, Tennessee. That's the western part of the state. And fairly hilly, somewhat rolling hills. And we're kind of in the part of the state that just gets a tremendous amount of rainfall each year. It always feels like each summer it gets more and more heavy rainfall compared to 10 years ago. We used to have, 2 to 4 months of drought every summer. Now it's, we're lucky to get 2 or 3 weeks without rain. And we're on about, including our paths, we're about 1 acre of cultivation. And it's what's inconvenient about our farm is that we're kind of around all these drainage ditches, and so it's spread out across these different ravines and gullies. But we're currently under about, I think we're using 85 100-foot beds. It's kind of like our production space. And we're growing, 52 weeks a year. We're growing and selling. I've got one full-time employee with another seasonal 2 to 3, depending on the time of the year. And it's me and my wife. I'm in charge of production, and she is in charge of post-harvest, sales, packaging, orders, quality control, customer service, all that stuff. Plus, she homeschools, takes care of 6 young kids, and keeps me alive. She has a bigger job than I do by far, and we're just always trying to find innovative ways on how to combat our difficult growing season, and it's kept us really, really busy.
Yeah, and would you describe? I mean, you were talking a little bit about your rainfall, but your summers are extremely hot. I mean, you're kind of in the deep south.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for sure, I would say, not, we definitely get in the hundreds. We're not as hot as, like, I would say, southern Texas, where they're getting in the, 110 to 115. But our heat index is well over 100 just about every single day. It's the humidity that really kills and causes a lot of diseases and issues in vegetables. Most vegetables can take a lot of heat, but it's the humidity that really causes a lot of havoc. And that is the challenge that I think a lot of southern growers face is, how do we grow healthy, good, nutrient-dense vegetables in a climate that is not too kind for a lot of the produce that we are trying to grow? It's a great environment if you're going to grow cotton, corn, soybeans, and things of that nature, peppers, eggplant, okra. But I think a lot of our customers that most of your listeners are trying to serve, a lot of our clients are looking for a more diverse, nutrient-dense variety of vegetables that is, it's definitely a challenge to produce high-quality vegetables year-round consistently.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people maybe don't realize is just how intense humidity. We get pretty well close to 100% humidity for the majority of the summer here as well, and it's not maybe quite as oppressive as it is down there, but it is intense and is extremely hard, especially on leafy greens, which tend to be the crops that our customers want the most.
Yep.
Well, let's just start there, because I think that's a really I want to get really technical with you today as much as we can, and I kind of want to start there. You do a lot of lettuce production and greens production. So what, in terms of humidity, like, are there things that you've developed that have been helpful in that?
Yes. There's a number of things that we've done. And, what really got me going with greens was I visited Paul Whittaker, which I think you know as well.
Love Paul. Yeah. Great guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a legend in this part of the country. So I visited his farm in 2009, and I saw the varieties Skyphos and Panisi side by side in November when everything outside was dead. And this was before I had a farm, and I had just completed my first season as a garden for my family. And I went up there because I was looking at hiring him to come down and just give me some pointers. And when I saw those 2 varieties, I was just, I knew right then that's what I wanted to do consistently. But Paul failed to tell me that those crops do not like our high humid heat environment. And so that was a hard lesson learned the summer of 2010. Anyways, I think what happened is, when Paul came down and we just had a high tunnel, he kind of helped us get all that laid out and started. And when we took those lettuces to the farmers market for the first time, people were literally taking that from our hands as we were taking it out of our truck. They said they had never seen lettuce like that in 30 years. And so it was kind of at that moment, here was a crop that I really was passionate about growing and eating. And not only did I enjoy growing it, but people seemed to really enjoy eating it as well. And so then I was, after that first summer, horrendous summer for us. I learned that since no one else was really doing this in my markets, that it seemed to be a good idea to see if we can figure this out. And after several years, tens of thousands of dollars in trials and varieties, and just a bunch of mistakes, what I've kind of found basically was, variety is everything, and always be trying new varieties from different companies all the time, because you never know when your favorite variety will no longer be available, which I think every seasoned grower has experienced the pain of your favorite variety not being available that year, right? I mean, there's nothing worse. And so there's that. There's also really paying attention to soil health. I think it's the bedrock and the foundation of every farm is healthy, good soil that's well balanced, high in organic matter, and water, and trying to keep the soil, the roots of those greens, as cool as possible. And there's many ways to do that. And I think a combination of those kind of basic things has kind of helped us really fine tune this production, where we have lettuce to sell 52 weeks a year for the past 4 to 5 years, I would say.
That's amazing. So, and then how does that, and then in terms of the humidity, like, I know there's a lot of different things you have to tackle in terms of producing summer lettuce, and I'm happy to talk about all of those because I think you've been kind of my mentor on the subject. How about in terms of tackling humidity with that issue? Variety is one, soil health is one. Are there others?
I would say timing of planting, seeding. So do you mind if I just walk you through kind of what our kind of overall it's be very basic, but I think a lot of your listeners may appreciate kind of the process. And that is, when you're trying to grow lettuce, say in July and August, I'll just preface this by saying, if you're a new grower or even a seasoned grower, and you're in a market that has a lot of vegetables, it's busy, everybody wants to eat salads in the summertime. There's tomatoes, there's cucumbers. Who doesn't want to have a nice, cool salad in the summer? And if you're in a climate or in a market stream that does not have a lot of lettuce growers, then there's an opportunity for you to really consider fine-tuning lettuce production, because it can really help bankroll your farm if you can have consistent production and consistent sales, which is two important things, right? Growing is the easy part, but selling it and having that consistent customer base is a complete other ball game, at least in my experience. But recognizing that need for a niche of having lettuce production in the summertime is really a great way to help balance cash flow in that season. So, and I recognize that very quickly, having gone to a market with established farmers of 20 or 30 years. And when I looked around, I went, there's no reason to compete with these growers who are growing great tomatoes, eggplant, cucumbers, okra, and all those summer crops. I need to have something different that can help me stand out as a new grower. So once you get into the deep south, or even there's a lot of parts of the country now that is well over 100 degrees during the summer months, which is not just the south. So it can be difficult to just even get those lettuce seeds to germinate, much less grow well. And then you got to get those plants in the ground and survive. And, every step from seed to even harvest, nature is telling you this is a bad idea. And technically, it is a bad idea. But as farmers, I think, we're always battling against nature. Nature is always fighting against us. And so I think as farmers, we're kind of used to going against nature in some sort of way. So, and I know there's a lot there, but I think it's kind of important to understand that this is not easy. So everything that I'm going to tell you is it's a lot harder than the way I explain it, but it's important to understand why I'm working as hard as I am through this problem. So number one is you have to have consistent germination. Without consistent, healthy transplants, you have nothing. So I use a germination chamber. I got one about 5 years ago to help me combat the issue of inconsistent germination. And a good tip for growers is keep your lettuce seed in a freezer. If you keep your lettuce seed in in your living room or your kitchen or wherever you keep your seeds, in my experience, once it goes from your room temperature to your greenhouse, there isn't enough temperature difference to help those lettuce seeds break dormancy. So keeping them in the freezer will greatly help your germination rate. Then it's, in that germination chamber, it comes out after they pop, and they're in a greenhouse for about 3 weeks. I like to harden them outside for at least a week because, again, with the summer temps blazing, if you take those fresh, tender lettuce transplants that have been grown in a controlled environment in the greenhouse, they're going to have a tough time surviving in that summer brutal day. So that 1 week hardening off process is a really crucial step for us. Then once they're out there for a week, it'll go outside in the field. We cover that transplant with shade cloth for about 2 weeks. And what that does, that is to help get the roots to get themselves established in the soil, which is really important to help keep that soil cool. Then once that lettuce kind of gets established, we pull off that shade cloth, and then we have automatic timers because even though you can get a rainstorm, you can get 4 inches one day and have no rain and be hot for a week, those lettuces can be dead in 2 days. So having timers really helps with consistent watering, which I found to be really helpful on our farm. And then, like clockwork, about 4 weeks after you plant, we need to get those things harvested in the early morning and get them to the pack shed as soon as possible. So that's kind of like our basic overall process on how we cycle that through.
That's great. Yeah, we get a lot of people that ask us in the summer, like how we do lettuce. And I always tell them, you have to do every step correctly is how you get lettuce in the summertime. And you have to be very careful. A question that actually came in from our Patreon members that I think is good for this moment. It's actually a 2-part question. Are you doing mainly loose leaf or mainly head lettuce? And then are you getting second cuttings on the loose leaf lettuce?
I would say
over the summer,
we're doing loose leaf and head lettuce, both, and we do not try to get a second cut. In fact, I rarely try to get a second cut because I feel like the flavor, the texture, and the quality is not consistent with that of the first cut, if that makes sense.
And are you referring also to the winter or is that exclusively the summertime?
That is basically summer, fall. We do some in the winter sometimes, but even then I just find even in the winter, because of excess humidity, especially there's no way I've been able to grow lettuce outside during the winter without tunnels. But once you get into tunnel growing, then you get into all sorts of excess humidity issues because they're trying to keep it covered, to keep those plants alive. But in the process of keeping those plants covered, there tends to be a lot less airflow and a lot more chances for diseases.
Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking when you were talking earlier about what you're doing for humidity, I was wondering if and where the tunnels come into play on that.
Yeah. Well, and just to be clear, in the summertime, you cannot change humidity. It's 100% humidity. You can do things in a airtight tunnel, right? You can definitely control humidity to some extent. If you had like $100,000 tunnel with, heaters and exhaust fans and, air exchangers that can basically draw out the humidity, you can do that. But don't think it's going to be that economical for a grower to go through all that effort when if you can just implement some of these basic practices and, again, we don't live in a climate that is perfect for lettuce growing. That climate is in California, which is why they're so good at it because it's dry. They have almost next to no humidity. It rarely rains. They can control that, and they're just very, very good. So we don't have the climate that is conducive for perfect lettuce or green growing. So there's nothing you can do about it. What you can do, though, is you can observe, which I do every single day, and have a number of techniques and systems in place to set your farm up for as consistent production as possible. And that's basically what I've done. It's not perfect. It's not as good as with those California growers, but we've done a lot of great improvements on our farm where we can have this available year round. And to be clear, we're not a lettuce farm. We do a lot of lettuce production, but we do, 60 other varieties of other vegetables too. So we're doing this for a lot of other different crops. Lettuce is one of those things that just helped us stand out because no one else had it in West Tennessee.
Yeah. And it's actually something I wanted to talk to you about with some of the other vegetables you're doing. But I do want to stick on lettuce for just one more minute because this is something that I know I'd like to hear a little bit more about. You've done a lot of trials, and I had another Patreon member, Patrick O'Connor, who asked about those sort of easy, what are they, the easy leaf ones from High Mowing. Can you talk a little bit about those? Yeah, can you talk about those trials a little?
So I did exclusive trials on those, and I think some of those varieties are comparable to Salanova, but the flavor of those varieties was it wasn't bitter. It just the flavor seemed off, and a lot of our customers, they don't just buy because we're local. They buy because our food tastes good. And in our experience, and keep this in mind, when I talk flavor, this has to go through my 6 kids, right? We eat a lot of salad. And if it doesn't taste good, they will not eat it. In fact, they won't eat any vegetables that come from a grocery store because they said that it all tastes dead. So if there is a vegetable that we grow on our farm that does not taste good, and they won't eat it, then it's really hard for us to pass it on to our customer. So in my experience, the multi-cut, easy leaf varieties, the flavor just was not there for us. So, it's just the yields, I would say, were similar in the summertime. And even in the wintertime, it's still, the flavor was not there, which I think, and maybe it's our soil, possibly, maybe, who knows, but the Salanova just has a great flavor. However, I will have to say this for a lot of your listeners now going forward in the 2020 growing season. The green sweet crisp Salanova variety, in my experience, something happened to the strain this past season, and it is not the same lettuce that it used to be. It could be an off year, I'm not sure, but the flavor and the growing profile of that one lettuce seemed to be really, really different. So much so that we're actually going to drop all the Salanova varieties for our summer production. And we're just going to do all-star lettuce mix from Johnny's.
Wow, okay.
Because the flavor of the all-star, this is just during the summer months. The all-star was twice as flavorful and sweet as the Salanova.
And with that all-star mix, you're still doing those in cell trays?
Nope.
Or no, you're doing those in paper pot?
No, we are doing 5-row jank.
You're direct seeding the lettuce in the middle of the summer. Okay, now you have to talk a little bit about how that works.
Oh, yeah. So we've been trying this for several years now because, again, everything that I'm saying here, every farmer needs to try another farm because every farm has their own microclimate. But this is something that's worked very well for us. So with that 5-row Jang seeder, because it's consistently spaced, and I found a lot less disease with the 5-row than with the 1-row because you can get someone else to run that 5-row, and it's perfectly spaced apart. And in my experience, you need to have as much consistency in your spacing as possible. Because if you have lettuce that's too close together, it's not going to have as much airflow, and then that will start to die from certain diseases, depending on where you're at, and then that will just spread. So I really like the 5-row Jang. So we're doing, 2 passes on a 30-inch bed, and we're keeping that watered. We do cover that with shade cloth. It takes about 7 days to germinate really well, where in the germination chamber it takes 2. But in the summertime, we are looking to work less hours in the summer. And with hand transplanting, which, works fine, we're just finding that we don't want to take that much time hand transplanting all that lettuce and greens on a weekly basis. So with that 5-row Jang, you can, seed 2 beds in less than 10 minutes. It's way faster than a paper pot. And there's no transplanting, there's no soil cost, there's no watering. So once we see that in the beds, we have automatic timers on our water system. Depending on the weather and what's happening, it can be 4 cycles in a 24-hour period, maybe 10 to 15 minutes per cycle. You don't want to water that too deep because then you're going to water all those weed seeds that are down deep in the soil. So we're just looking for a shallow watering, maybe like an inch, which is why we do 4 rotations, where we want to keep that 1 inch moist enough for that all-star to germinate. And then, we're keeping that weed free, which in our system is pretty easy to do. And then what we're doing is we're waiting about, it's ready in about 4 weeks, and then we're letting that all-star dry. So we're going to harvest this with the greens harvester probably late morning, early afternoon, by the time it's really, really dry. And then we harvest that, and then we immediately package that into bags, and that's it.
Oh, so you're actually harvesting that in the afternoon, like you said, when it's dry. So you're not doing any washing or spinning.
When it's dry. No. Now, to clarify, this is only grown in tunnels because the amount of rain that we get in the past several years of trying this out in the field, we can do it, but the leaves get so dirty from the backsplash, which can cause all kinds of funky diseases in a high humidity climate. So we found that growing in a farmer's friend style caterpillar tunnel is the most effective way to grow greens in the summertime because you can control the water perfectly. We have drop down misters, so it's not a really heavy irrigation. It's nice and light. So there's basically zero backsplash on the bottom of the leaves, and you're keeping that very clean. And when we harvest that, there's really no dirt on there. And so in my experience in trials the last couple of years, that's been able to keep for a month because we're not handling it. There's a lot less bruising. We're not handling it by hand. We're not washing it. And again, a lot of the post-harvest becomes an issue when you start having other help. That's where I think the less you can handle produce, the better for everybody. So this one item was attractive because we kind of created a system that allowed for minimal handling and maximum shelf life. And that's like really, really fit the bill perfectly, especially for summer production. We have that same method for arugula and other greens as well. So that is a new change for us. We kind of saw this coming 2 summers ago, and we've been kind of setting up our farm and our system to see if this would be a reality.
Yeah, that's super neat. So, okay, so maybe I'll have to point people to your masterclass to learn a little bit more about lettuce, and we can start on some of these other crops that you do because you do so many other, like you do radishes really well. You pretty much do the turnips. Beets. It seemed like. Can you talk about?
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe pick one or two of those and talk about how you're doing those in the middle of the summer.
Yes. Yep. So let's start with the first thing. The number one thing is weeds. As most southern growers know, there's this. Our last frost date can be May 5th, and then a week later it's almost 100 degrees. And there's this point in the season that I think every grower can relate to. Like in May, it's like, the weather's beautiful. There's no weeds. You've done such a good job. And then you go out one morning and the weeds are everywhere. It's all ready to harvest. And like it hits you all at one time. It's like the weed apocalypse, right? And just everything is against you. And so what happens is, a lot of growers have a hard time recovering from May. And so from May till July, they're just battling weeds. They're battling losing crops to weeds, especially a lot of these root crops and leafy greens that are direct seeded. And you throw in life in there. And, if you have a family, everyone knows that, life and farming together is never perfect. And so this is where burnout comes. So the first thing is really getting a handle on the weed situation. Because keeping weeds at bay on a farm can really keep your and your crew, your team's morale and spirits upbeat, which allows for better decisions, better thinking, and just overall better success. So there's kind of two things that we implement for that, especially in May. Number one, we do as little direct seeding as possible from the month of March through, I would say, June. And this is why we do a lot of landscape fabric, because there's this period of time when it's really tough because we work an 8-hour day. It's tough to get all those weeds under control on time in the middle of setting up the farm for summer. So we do a lot of fabric, and then on the crops that we do direct seed, we will make sure that that's been tarped for at least 2 to 4 weeks before we direct seed, unless it's been like on a bed that, like for instance, say we pulled up some kale or maybe it was, celery from the winter, and it's been on fabric the whole winter. And, we know for the most part the weeds will be good. But in general, you want to have that bed tarped for several weeks before you do any direct seeding. Because what happens is you can direct seed those crops, but then everything else, all the weeds will outgrow your crop, and you'll be depressed, and you'll give up, and you'll quit, and you'll ask yourself, why are you farming? Which I think every grower at some point or another has experienced that feeling especially in July or August. So that's kind of like the foundation of any of these direct seeded crops, is really making sure that you have your weeds under control. And a lot of that comes from just too much rain in the springtime, and just causes those seeds deep underneath the soil to germinate and pop. And you can only combat so many of those at one time. And this is where I think growing in tunnels really can be an effective tool, because you can control the precise amount of water that you want on that bed. But I think a lot of growers that are listening may not have access to a lot of tunnels at the exact moment. So this practice can definitely be used out in the field. You'll just have a much easier time if you can grow underneath the tunnel. So what we're doing is, and now because we're not really doing any cropping, is, let's just say, I'll kind of walk through the process here. Let's just say we cropped out arugula, and I want to go back in with all-star direct seeded with a 5-row jang, or a single jang if that's what you have. What we'll do is we will harvest the arugula with the greens harvester. We will drop between 10 to 20 5-gallon buckets of compost on that. I'll water that in for maybe 30 minutes, and then I will cover that with a tarp for 1 week. And then 5 days later, there is nothing left. And then what we'll do is we'll get that jang direct seeded in that bed on top of the compost and the debris that's completely broken down. We'll do 2 passes with that 5-row jang and turn on the water for about 10 to 15 minutes, set up your shade cloth, and get that timer set for depending on what the weather is going to be. And then after that all-star germinates, which is typically around 7 days, then on the 7th to 10th day, we will use a tine weeder and go over that bed with any kind of weeds that may be popping by that point. And we only have to do that really once. And we're watching for bugs. We're watching for any weeds that we may have missed. We're making sure it's clean. We're making sure it's watered properly. And we're just waiting for that to get ready for harvest. And we do that same system for basically all-star arugula and radishes.
And that time weeder, that's the Too Bad Cats one, or is it the Elliott Coleman one?
We have both. I think we like the Johnny Seed one, the Elliott Coleman one, the best. And that's our most used weeding tool on the farm. Is that time weeder? That's a great tool. And then I will have to say one thing on root crops. I think the worst pest that I think most people will encounter will be like the flea beetles, which can be really devastating for things like bok choy, radishes, turnips. Any of those kind of crops, they can really destroy a lot of those greens really quickly. I'm a big fan of beneficial nematodes, and I spray those down starting the 1st of March once a month until it gets to about July. And that really helps establish those nematodes in the soil and really helps a lot in keeping a lot of those flea beetles and root maggots at bay. It's not perfect, but we have a lot of success with that.
Yeah, and that bed flip that you described is pretty cool. That's kind of, when you say so you cut your arugula, for instance, you top that with some compost, and then you're putting a tarp over it. When you say a tarp, are you talking just a piece of landscape fabric, or are you talking because it's usually probably, one or two beds? I mean, what are you using for that?
Yeah. So we like to use a 4-foot wide landscape fabric because it's light and it doesn't hold water. As anyone knows, using tarps, I would say, work a little bit better, but they're a little bit more difficult to maneuver.
Right.
And so with the fabric, one, you can put a few staples in there and it won't rip out. Or if you put a staple in plastic, it's just going to rip if it gets any kind of wind. We like the fabric because it's easy to roll up, it stores well, and it's light. So with that kind of system, we've really got that dialed in to where we're not doing any what I would call bed flipping cropping now. It's simply we harvest whatever the crop is, and this goes for radishes and turnips, whatever it is. We're just putting compost on top of whatever residue is there. And the one key part that you cannot miss is you have to water that in, because you need moisture to help break down the debris, which is going to encourage earthworms and other living life to come in and help decompose that. And then, of course, heated water helps to break down all that plant life. And literally in 5 days, you can lift. I mean, I've got videos and a lot of pictures in my course on this, but 5 days later, there's nothing left. And then I'm not even raking. We're literally just going over that with that 5-row jank. So we put, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, but we have that compost spreader that can go behind the BCS. It straddles the bed and really makes light work of all this. Plus, they're adding a lot of organic matter. So that whole system really worked very, very well for us. This summer, we started trialing this 2 or 3 years ago, and it just took us a while to, because the compost part, I think, is a really important aspect of it. And, doing that on 10 beds a week is a lot of work, especially when you're doing 10 to 20 buckets. And so we finally got kind of a system timing. We went from tarps to fabric, different widths of fabric, and we kind of have settled on that 4-foot wide, just doing one bed at a time. We tried a double bed of fabric because most of the time we're doing at least 2 beds at one time, but we kind of always go back to the one bed because it gives us more flexibility in changing out crops. And anytime you can make your farm more flexible, the better. But that whole system really, I'm not sure how you do this or how other growers do it, but we used to, we'd get the scuffle hoe and you would cut all the crop out and you have to rake it up and scoop it up in buckets. And that, depending on who's doing that work, that could easily take a new person an hour, or more. And, it gets exhausting after a while, especially when it's 100 degrees outside and it's 2:00 and you don't want to be out there. So this system of composting, watering, and tarping really made the whole no-till system very, very easy and enjoyable. And just what we saw with the plant health, we saw a lot less disease. The pest, I'm a little hesitant to say less pest, just because we did some side by side with this kind of new system and our old. Couldn't really see a big difference in pests, but I think some of that has to do with our beneficial nematodes that we have established in the farm that we do every spring. But in general, we saw a lot of pros in that overall bed flipping system. Works really well in a no-till context. You can plant lettuce in there, whatever crops you're doing, kale, collards, peppers. There's really nothing that you can't plant in that kind of system.
Hey, you all, quick interruption. Counting down the last handful of episodes before the end of the podcast season and the start of the growing season, really, I get back to farming and using all this info we've been gathering here. That information, if you like it and appreciate it and you want to see it keep coming in the fall, consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/farmerjesse. You can always kick us a couple bucks over at Venmo as well to @NoTillGrowers and just say thanks for the show, dude. But when you go the Patreon route, not only do you get discounts on events and such, like the one that we have coming up at Neversink Farm, you should check that out. I think there's only a couple tickets left. Literally a couple tickets, so I would literally stop what you're doing, go check it out if you're interested. That's on May 17th. You also, by being a patron, get advanced opportunity to ask questions of guests, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to any other, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to JM Fortier, Kevin Keene, Dan Brisebois, Matt Halloway, Anthony Favron-Nishaw, Jacob Arthur, Ryan Goser, John Mills, William Henpen, and Yannick LaPlante. Huge thank you to our supporters and just all of you listeners. We really appreciate it. Y'all are amazing. Back to Ray. I think before we started talking, you were telling me a little bit about doing some deep composting. Is that how you're setting up beds now, or is that just kind of become a tool in the toolbox, or what are your thoughts on that?
So basically, kind of back up, about 2 years ago, we had a major series of flooding events on our farm. And when we first started farming 10 years ago, it was farmed previously by a farmer who had done pumpkins for 15 years. All he did was triple 15 fertilizer, and the soil was lifeless. So we spent 8 years building it up and got the organic matter from not even 1 to almost 8. And then in one season, we just lost most of that. So we had to start over. It was devastating for us, very discouraging, but it also allowed us to kind of rethink on how we're going to kind of go forward. So this is when we really started to use a lot more landscape fabric outside, because we knew we had to do a lot more deep composting, but we did not want to lose it again to heavy rains. And a lot of these heavy rains would be like right after we would plant a crop, right? And it would just completely level that raised bed. So by using fabric, it helped protect our investment of soil, especially during these June, July months where we get a lot of very, very heavy rain. So I think in this whole thing of we were doing a tremendous amount of heavy composting, seeing just record yields of lettuce. And that's really got us thinking about, how can we do less soil disturbance to keeping this whole layer of compost intact? And so I think that whole year of us losing a lot of our topsoil made us think a little bit differently on how we're going to farm going forward in the future. So in that so basically we're essentially doing no-till, but I'm not dogmatic about it. There is times when, let's just say, we had a bed outside. maybe we lost a client for that particular crop. We need to get something else in there, and we didn't do a good job in cultivating that bed, and we just need to just start over. And that's where I would use like a PDR, which is that persistent depth roller that's on the back of a tiller for the BCS. Love that tool. We've stopped using the power harrow altogether, and broad forking for that matter. We no longer use those two tools at all on our farm. And we would just you could set that PDR to even a half inch just to get a better soil tilt, depending on if you're going to seed or transplant. So that's why, I still have that tool available. There's sometimes on the farm you need to start over, and so having that tool to help us fix problems or start over is great. But in general, we're doing a lot more compost, deep bedding, and planting or seeding right on top of that.
Yeah, that's cool. Are you still using paper pot a lot? Is that still something that you're able to utilize?
Yes. On crops like beets, I don't think I would grow beets without the paper pot. So on the lettuce, so I'll just kind of give a story of so on the farm, as I said earlier, my wife is in charge of post-production, so pack house, packaging, and if vegetables do not look good, then I hear about it. So there was 2 summers when we switched to the paper pot. We loved it because it was saving us time, but my wife hated it because a lot of our crops were outside, and the amount of backsplash that was getting on the leaves was, she was just like, it is slowing me way down. I've got to empty the water after every 25 to 30 pounds. And so we really argued about this for about 2 years. And so I think finally, at the beginning of last year, she's like, you know what, this year, so, every year we always talk about things we want to do differently. And so last spring, she's like, you know what, I don't care what you do. Just please stop using the paper pot on lettuce. So I said, okay, this is what we'll do. So this was after, mind you, we lost all the topsoil. And so it kind of worked out that, hey, we were going to put 50,000 pounds of compost on these 80 beds. We want to protect that investment. And we'll use fabric. We'll hand plant. It will also make my wife happy. So we did that. And yes, she was ecstatic. She went through from changing the water, every 25 to 50 pounds to maybe changing the water every 300 to 400 pounds. Mind you, we're doing 1,000 pounds on a really good week during the peak season. So it's a lot. And she can wash, spin, and package 100 pounds by herself. So she is a machine. And so anything that, so this whole paper pot system really threw off her whole groove of being able to go and wash all the salad mix effectively. So we stopped using them on Salanova. We actually saw that we did some trials in the wintertime with side-by-side paper pot, Salanova, and fabric, and found in the wintertime that Salanova grown on fabric was ready to harvest 2 weeks earlier, which may not sound a lot, but if you're a farmer in the wintertime and you want to crop steer, having crops on fabric can be a great tool to help speed up the growth. So we are using the paper pot a lot less, but it's still a very valuable tool. We use it for scallions. We use it for beets. We use it a lot in the wintertime for radishes and turnips and arugula because it can get us almost a 2 to 3, sometimes 4 week jump if you're trying to seed these things in December. So it's a great tool. And that's kind of how I look at it. It's a tool in the toolbox, depending on what we're trying to do, what time of the year, if that makes sense.
And then when you're prepping ground for those paper pot crops, are you using that PDR, or are you just going straight into compost, or what's that process look like?
That process depends because, we some parts of the field will use that PDR, and some of it we may not need to. So it kind of depends what stage that field is. Also, this is where tunnels really come in handy. If it's outside, you're kind of at the mercy of when did it last rain? And so sometimes, if it's still a little bit, it's not wet, but it's not that really nice dry powdery, which is what you really need for the paper pot to work well. Lightly going over that bed with the PDR will help dry out that soil enough where you can plant that with the paper pot.
Right. And one thing you mentioned kind of before we started talking, you've touched on it a little bit, is just how effective it can be to use tunnels in the summertime. And one thing that I've noticed that we've noticed on our farm in particular is beets. The greens look significantly better when we grow them in the tunnel. I think maybe just that little bit of shade. But it's night and day.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say it does provide a little shade. I think it's around 10 to 15%, which may not seem like a lot, but it really is when that sun is baking those greens. But also, I would say protection from excess water is even more important than protecting from the sun. But again, like you said, it is a night and day difference growing outside greens, beets, any kind of baby root crops, any kind of really any vegetable, period, except maybe like okra. Okra just doesn't care. But we've noticed a night and day difference on all vegetables grown in the tunnel versus outside, which is why we are now 100% grown under tunnels. We got our last 12 this past fall. We had a really good spring and summer, but still lost a number of crops from heavy rainfall. And everything that was in the tunnels thrived perfect. We were just cranking with production. And so we were just exhausted from dealing with all this insane rain. I think a farmer had told me that West Tennessee broke the 1982 rainfall record. I haven't fact-checked that information, but that's what I was told. I believe him. So let's just say we were just all sick of the excess rain and loved what the tunnels did. And so we decided to try a year with 100% growing under tunnels. And that's what we're going to do this year. So we're super excited about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. 100% is a lot on an acre. And that's the majority of that is cat tunnels?
Yeah, it's all cat tunnels and one high tunnel, which we're fixing to retrofit to a peak vented tunnel.
And are you doing anything in terms of wind protection on those cat tunnels? Or is that much of an issue where you are? It survived, well, let's see. We get up to 60 miles an hour. So we had one evening where it was 60 miles an hour, and one tunnel, the last bow, that clip that held our metal purlin in place, sheared off, and we had to rush out there and stake it down with a ratchet strap. But other than that, it does really well. I would say the key in those things is, if you have a big wind coming, try to seal up that tunnel during that windstorm. That way, wind doesn't go inside the tunnel and inflate it and blow it off. You want the wind to hit it and then go around it. Yeah. Yeah, it's something that we've struggled with on our cat tunnels, is keeping them in the ground during wind. Even when they're well secured, our problem is that the density of our soil is such that it doesn't quite grip that rebar enough. Um,
Oh yeah. Our soil does not perk,
uh-huh.
which is a major problem on our farm. So it is. I mean, you almost when we want to pull up our stakes, we have to get a tractor to pull up that rebar. Like it is
Uh-huh.
in there. I mean, it is. It's very intense. So our soil is heavy, so it works just fine. But yeah, if you have nice, pliable, tillsy soil, it could be an issue, which I think could be solved by, have you ever seen those mobile home auger
Yeah,
anchors?
I was just talking to a guy about using those for the cat tunnel.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I would do if I didn't have this kind of soil. And to be clear on these cat tunnels, a high tunnel is way more enjoyable to work. My cat tunnel, my high tunnel, it's completely automated, sides, vents, exhaust fans, heater. It's all, I can control the humidity in the shoulder seasons. But when you're getting started, or if you're trying to grow greens and vegetables in the summertime, it's open, so you don't need that control. So cat tunnels can work well. And so, yeah, to be clarified, the cat tunnels are definitely more of a nuisance to maintain and work in. But in terms for the money, what you can grow and do in our part of the country is really worth the money.
Yeah, that's great. And before I let you go, I'd like you to talk a little bit. I saw inside your classes last year, your courses, but it's been a year. Can you talk about maybe give us a general idea of what's in there and also maybe some of the new stuff you've added?
Yep. So I've, yeah. So basically what's happened is I've had that there's a few things, limitations that I have. It's one, because I have a large family and they want my time and I want to be with them, I just could not answer the amount of emails, text, phone calls, visits. It was impossible to maintain, and I want to help people. There's just no way for me to do it all and maintain a quality of life, which I strongly guard. So I strongly guard my family time. And so in order to help get this information out there and continue, because it's not like I figured all this out, right? Like I'm always researching, I'm always doing trials with seed companies. We're always trying to adapt to our environment. That will never end. And so I didn't only want to help people solve the problems we've already solved, but I also want to make a platform for them to kind of keep following us along on a platform that enabled me to do it. So what we did is I was approached to put all this information in a course, and we hired a film guy, an editor, and had someone kind of put all this together for me. And then I just basically put the thing that I knew, and I created the course in real time during the summer, so people could see what it was like in real time, what these crops looks like in July and August. Like it's not perfect, but you can really see a lot of the successes that we have kind of created in one of the most hardest part of the year. And so what we've done is we've covered this from seed to store. So I've got 5 to 8 different marketing streams that we sell through different times of the year. There's, all the varieties. There's all the irrigation techniques, which is really important. And so we've set all these little bitty steps with files and all the links to our resources, where if you were to really follow this through, we help people with their plan, where they're kind of writing down the system for their farm, because every farm is different. And when you can write out your system, it really helps concrete how you're going to implement this in your farm going forward. And then each year, what I'm doing is as I'm doing trials and, some of these different growing techniques, is I'm recording those in the summertime And then during the fall and winter, we're getting those edited and uploaded. So people are kind of seeing how we're evolving real time. And then I've got a great Facebook group, a lot of amazing growers on there. And I try to do weekly kind of farm walks of real time of, hey guys, this week, this is the disease we're battling, and this is what I'm doing to combat it. Because I think that's one thing that I think a lot of growers appreciate. It's one thing seeing something that was recorded, a few seasons ago, but it's nice to see, hey, this is what I'm going through right now, and this is the mindset and the steps that I'm taking to solve this problem. There's always problems on a farm, and there's many ways to approach it. There's many ways to think about it. There's times when you just have to let it go, and there's times that, or like right now it's winter, and so right now people who have planted their lettuce back in the fall, it's either way ahead because of our warm weather, or it's maybe they were late. And so, we do a lot of crop steering. So right now I've got several beds of lettuce that seems to be growing a lot faster. And so right now I'm showing them in real time on how I'm slowing down the growth, like in real time. So I think that's really valuable. It's an amazing community of growers and folks. And that's kind of where a lot of my energy and time that I have has been really going toward.
That's great, Ray. Well, thank you so much for your time. It is always a pleasure to chat.
Absolutely. And really big fan of your work, Jesse. And, ever since we met back in 2015, I think I've always admired your work and what you're doing. And I think a lot of people, if I can just kind of just say this, I think we live in such an exciting time right now in agriculture, because there's folks like yourself who are taking the time and really sharing and gathering and collecting people and sharing information that really needs to be shared. And, this world needs people like you, Jesse, and others to keep this work up. It's a tremendous amount of work. I wouldn't want to do it for anything. I don't have the time. And so I appreciate what you do. And I know thousands of other people appreciate you too as well. And I just wanted to take this time and acknowledge that for all the other people who are listening. So thank you, Jesse.
Well, thank you, Ray. And we likewise appreciate what you're doing. So thank you. All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Rose Creek on Instagram and Facebook and all the places, and check out Ray's Lettuce Masterclass. I've seen inside of this thing. It is an enormous amount of bang for the buck. Check that out at lettuceclass.com. Make sure you are subscribed to this podcast so you know not just when a new episode is up, but a whole new season in the fall. Also, make sure to leave a review. Those help, I think, to bring in new people to the podcast. So this week, in the review, make sure to make an impassioned argument for why every banker in the U.S., nay, the world, should be listening to the No-Till Market Garden podcast. They should, though. Huge thanks to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin for their help with everything. Also, an enormous thank you to Hannah, my wife, for all her help behind the scenes. Could not do this without Hannah. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
How's life in Kentucky?
Oh man, it's good. It's feels so much like spring right now. It's
Great.
It's eerie. It's just I'm trying not to jump the gun. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I understand. Yep.